So while you have been with the family business for over 15 years now, you did work for other companies after your engineering. Can you take us through the journey post engineering?
Right at the end of my education at Cornell, I started getting a lot of job offers. Even before I graduated, I had companies sending me letters asking me to join them, showing fancy roles, responsibilities, and career growth and money and all that stuff. At that time, I had no idea what working in America meant. I mean, it was just a like everybody's doing, so you're doing it kind of situation. But before that, one of the questions you asked me how I started in my engineering, and that was sort of funny and embarrassing in hindsight. So obviously, just like everybody else, I had done my 12th standard exams, and I did pretty well. And so everybody said, you've done good in 12th standard, so you should do engineering. So that was as simple as that. So getting good marks was a way to define my entire life, and nothing more than that. It wasn't really more fanciful than that. So I did my engineering, and then after that, I explained to you how I went to America. uh, in after right before I graduated, I had a job. Actually, I had a job, very good job, at a company called General Electric. It was quite a fancy job in their aircraft division, so to say. It was quite fancy. But as this gentleman sent me an email at that time asking me to meet him, and he said he would change the way I looked at career. So I was not very keen because, like I said, I didn't have any particular thoughts on living in America or working there. But nevertheless, I did give him a chance, and that was the time I changed my perspective in working. We spent 3 hours together. He was a vice president of a very large construction management company, probably the largest one in the world, called Bovis Land Lease. At that time, they had over 100,000 employees. But the way he sold that company to me, that was my re-entry into this business once again. He told me I would be wasting my entire career if I joined somebody like General Electric, where I would be nobody. Where I had, working for him, get the opportunity to build one of the fanciest buildings in the world, and surely they had done the most fancy buildings in the world. They had done Statue of Liberty renovation. They had worked on World Trade Center in New York. They had worked on Sears Tower. They had worked on so many buildings that working for them would have been a treat. So with little thought, I joined them, and there was no looking back. So I took up that job, and I worked with them for 7 years, and then somebody else pursued me. I was in another company for another 3 or 4 years, and by the time I was done, it was almost 15 years. About 10 or 12 years into my working, my father started putting an idea in my mind that working in India would be intriguing, interesting. Things were changing, things were opening up. Until then, I had looked at India, but it was not really interesting because what we were doing in America was far more interesting than things here. But right around 10 or 12 years, probably in the early 2000s, things were changing at that time. And when one of the trips I remember, I came to India and I looked at some of the projects that were happening, and they were at par with what we were doing work in the US. The technology we were using here, and the processes that we were using here, obviously, were at par. And in 2005, I changed my mind, and all of a sudden, within probably 6 months, I moved everything back, and I was working in India.
Right. So could you give some examples as to what kind of technologies were you looking at, like when you
So,
were?
so one of the biggest challenges of working in America is the management of risk, um, because everything has got a value. Time has got a value. Unlike many of the projects that are done in India, every delay, every minute is accountable to somebody. And that sense of accountability was the most important thing. How you manage that risk and how much, how you manage that time. So you used lots of tools to manage those risks, to decimate those risks, to identify those risks, so on, and make each person responsible for those risks. I saw that people were working at a similar level in India, obviously not as stringently followed, but nevertheless the thought process was there. The materials that were being used in India at that time were quite similar to what we used in the US. And looking at the opportunity of what could happen in India over the next so many years, it was a perfect time to look at this market.
Right, right. And also, so you mentioned that you worked with two companies in US. What
Right.
was the field that your role was around? Uh,
So I started as a project manager. I used to manage projects. I used to be at the ground. I used to build the projects from ground up. And as I started becoming senior in the organization, I started managing people. I started managing larger projects. I started managing teams. I started managing risk. Few projects we were construction managers at risk, which means we paid for the mistakes we made. So which means my job was to look at the profit. Eventually I started getting into profit and loss management positions, which eventually led me to change my companies and start assuming roles of operations. And finally, when I left, I was managing the operations of a large construction company.
okay. So you went right from ground up, ground level
Oh yeah, yes, yes. Right from holding the tape and managing the third shift, all the way to managing the operations of a company. So yeah, my journey was from ground up.
right.